Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest project from TWRP Remix Party, Return to Wherever. This is the follow-up project to last year's Together Through Time, the band's album following a series of EPs that they had dropped, where over the course of those EPs they had been really working on and improving and really perfecting their own sound, and I felt like on Together Through Time they had really reached the peak of that sound. It was really much like what the band was doing on those EPs, but just culminated into a full album's length. It was one of my favorite albums of last year, and overall just an all-around fun and fantastic rock project. However, I wasn't really sure what the band was going to be doing on their follow-up project because, like I said, I felt like Together Through Time was the peak and the natural conclusion to what the band was doing on those EPs. I wasn't sure exactly what direction the band was going to go in, especially only a little over a year after that project came out. But just looking at the track listing and the credits on this project, not even looking at the actual music itself here on this thing, it's apparent that this project is trying out some new ideas. For one thing, this album runs a fair bit shorter than Together Through Time, being at only around a half an hour and 9 tracks in length. Furthermore, this album lacks a lot of the features that were present on Together Through Time, as well as a lot of the EPs that the band had dropped prior to that album as well. There are some featured artists on this thing in the form of some background instrumentals and some spoken word segments. However, for the most part, none of these tracks here have a featured credit to them. You have to, look further into the album's credit list on your own free time to see some of these artists get, officially credited. So it seems like on this project, TWRP Remix Party are trying to put themselves really in the focus here. After listening to this album a good few times, I could say that the direction that the band went in on this album actually makes a fair bit more sense than I was expecting going into it. But not in the sense that I feel like this is a continuation necessarily of the sound present on Together Through Time. More so, I feel like this is kind of an adjacent sound to it. Like, if the band had released this as their debut album instead of Together Through Time, it would have made just as much sense in my opinion. I think this is mostly due to the fact that whereas Together Through Time was really bombastic and over the top with lots of features and giant, massive, catchy hooks, this project's a bit more low-key overall, but at the same time, it does so in order to have a greater focus put onto the band themselves and just a more focused concept and sound as well. I feel that on Together Through Time, the band was really focused on making individual songs that also just so happened to flow together rather nicely. But I feel like here on this new album, the band is more focused than ever on making a full album experience where listening to it in order and all of that is especially important. I feel like you can't really remove a track from this thing without the album feeling kind of messed up or empty in a sense. And this is further helped on this project by the overarching concept to this thing, which is that the album is being played on like this radio broadcast with this radio narrator coming in every so often to kind of talk about the album and just some other things like that. Pretty basic concept. It doesn't really tie too much into the themes of the songs themselves on this thing, but it does help tie this thing together into a very cohesive experience. Another thing that I like about this radio concept overall is how it ties together with the L.A.D.Y EP that the band dropped back in 2017. If you remember correctly, on the end of the L.A.D.Y title track, there's the same radio speaker's voice that appears, which I guess is supposed to mean that this album is being played on like the same radio station that that EP, or at least that song, was. I'm not sure exactly what this means in the greater scheme of these individual tracks on the albums themselves, but I just thought it was kind of cool how the band kind of made a continuity between this album and a previous project of theirs. And it's also kind of what I meant when I said earlier how I felt like this could have been released in place of Together Through Time and made just as much sense, because L.A.D.Y was the band's final EP that they dropped in that series of EPs of theirs, so I felt like starting out with that EP and continuing on into this project would have made a fair bit of sense, especially because L.A.D.Y, at least in my own opinion, was the most cohesive of all the EPs that they had dropped. Overall, while I like the fact that the radio broadcaster idea present on this album makes it a more cohesive experience and help ties it to some of the other material released by the band, I'm not the biggest fan of the fact that it takes up some of this album's already short runtime. Like I said before, this album's only around 30 minutes or so in length and only features 9 songs. But to say this project has 9 songs is a little misleading, honestly, because a couple of those are only the radio broadcaster speaking with some instrumentals behind him. And those aren't the most interesting on their own, I guess. I mean, they help the album flow together pretty nicely, but overall, after listening to this project a few times, I'm still a little disappointed by the fact that I feel like there could have been a couple more tracks added to this thing at least, because at times it does feel a little short. I guess overall, it's not necessarily that I dislike the radio broadcaster taking up time out of this album as much as it is that I wish that there was maybe a couple more cuts added to this thing. But really, it's a pretty small problem in the grand scheme of this album when you consider the actual quality material that you get on this project. All the songs on this thing fall pretty nicely into the sound that the band has already established for themselves at this point. However, there is some subtle experimentation going on here on this project, and I like the fact that for the most part, all the songs on this thing are a lot more low-key compared to a lot of the cuts off together through time, which, as I said before, we're trying to be a bit more bombastic and catchy. Throughout this project, you have your expected mixture of hard rock guitars, nice synth parts, and funky bass lines that you have come to expect from TWRP Remix Party at this point. However, they do occasionally mix in some new sounds and ideas into this as well, as I said before. The track Typhoon Turnpike is one that reminds me a lot of like a beach-themed level from like a Nintendo game or something like that. Maybe like a beach-themed Mario Kart level or Mario Party level, something like that. Like even the naming of this song here feels like it could be the naming of a level or a Mario Kart course or something like that. Overall, a pretty nice instrumental here, and I could definitely hear this being the background music to, like I said before, some beachy video game level or something. The closing track to this album, All Night Forever, is another one of the highlights on the project, featuring these very longing vocals from Dr. Sung during the verses that really don't sound too similar to any of the vocals he's done with the band on previous material, at least in my own recollection at least. I may be wrong with that, but the verses here on this track, at least his performances on them, don't really sound quite like anything he's done before, which I thought was pretty cool. Furthermore, the track also features this really danceable, groovy beat to it as well, features some nice guitar parts too, and the hook to the track is really catchy too. It's overall just a really solid cut from these guys, and I think it's a really nice closer to this thing as well. The track Under the Sun starts off rather slowly, but gradually builds in intensity throughout its run, probably the most defining aspect of this track, really. And once again, I think it's another one of the highlights on this thing, too. The track Hidden Potential occasionally features these spoken word segments that are thrown in by Ego Raptor, who's featured on the track. They sound really quirky, and they just mesh together really nicely with the fun vibe that this song has going for it overall. I think that this project isn't necessarily super experimental or forward-thinking by the band's standard at this point in time. However, I think with what experimentation it does bring to the table on these tracks, combined with the very cohesive nature of this project, they end up making a project here that is unlike anything that they've done before. When it comes to the lyrics on this project, the band keeps playing around with the same fun and upbeat themes that they always have to great effect here. For example, the track Generous Dimensions talks about having a positive body image. Hidden Potential talks about unlocking your own hidden potential and being a better person. All Night Forever is just a really fun love song. Really, throughout this project, the band, with their lyrics, are just kind of doing what they've always done, but I think that what they've always done has really worked for them, and there's so few bands out there, I feel, that are able to pull off lyrics that are this upbeat and inspiring and fun without sounding corny or cheesy or something like that. It's really quite impressive, the fact that they've been able to maintain this quality level of lyrics with this style, and yeah, I just gotta hand it to them. They do a great job with the lyrics here. Overall, Return to Wherever is a great follow-up to Together Through Time. I also really appreciate on this thing that the band isn't necessarily retreading the same ground that they did with that project. Rather, instead, playing around with a lot of the same sounds and ideas, but doing so in a way in order to create a more cohesive album. And I also really like the fact that this thing feels kind of like the spiritual successor, in a sense, to L.A.D.Y World. I kind of feel like this project could be called Return to L.A.D.Y World instead of Return to Wherever, because I feel like that's probably where it's talking about. I do wish on this thing that maybe the band had bothered to include a couple extra tracks in order to make this thing feel a bit longer and a bit more satisfying, I guess, to listen to overall. But still, with how great the songs that you do get on this thing are, mixed with how cohesive it is, Return to Wherever is still a really solid, enjoyable listening experience, and I'm just happy the band was able to pull it off yet again. I can see some fans of the band on their initial listens of this thing maybe not quite enjoying it as much as Together Through Time, given that that album features some more straightforward, catchy tracks that really aren't present on this one. However, I think that this project is one that with more listens, it grows on you more and more each time, as a lot of its strengths show themselves to you more and more with every listen. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this album to TWRP Remix Party fans out there, the fans of rock music, synth rock music, just really fun, upbeat summer music. This is definitely an album you need to hear. I would highly recommend it. It's definitely one that I'll be playing a lot this upcoming summer, or I guess this current summer that we're in. Yeah, it's already summer. But yeah, overall, fantastic project. Highly recommend it. And with that said, that is just my own personal review for this project. If you happen to disagree with me, it's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave your own thoughts on this album in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Things like album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. If you enjoy that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. I'm also going to have linked in the description down below my review of Together Through Time, so if you want to see my thoughts on that album, make sure you check that out too. Thank you for watching once again, and stay golden.